From Wakefield, it's the Nolan Night Show, inviting you to join Nolan and his guest this week, Steve Rowell, to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another edition of the show. And it's been such a pleasure doing this the last 100+ episodes. And this, again, is another prime example of an episode that it's hard to fathom that it was able to work out and get it. And through the technological issues we had before getting going here, we are now here. And I'm pleased to have my guests, and hopefully you've enjoyed the last bit of episodes. But besides that stuff, which I'm sure I'll mention again at the end, time for my introduction for this guest. It's both a pleasure and an immense honor to be joined this week by not only the radius of Rockport athletics, the crowned king of Kingston, but also an overall great guy off the court as well. I'm grateful to have Steve Rowell as our guest this week for this edition of the show. Welcome, Steve, to the program.
Thank you, Nolan. It's a pleasure to be here. Very happy.
It's great. It's funny to think that it's been many years since you were last a student here, and all those years later, I don't want to say it so it makes it seem like I'm aging you, which I certainly wouldn't want to do that. But it's sort of how there's a certain span. I graduated from URI last spring, so it's been almost an even number of decades in between. Not only as a player did you experience, of course, success as a coach as well, and now not just our alma mater URI is sort of back to full swing with no real interruption from the last 3 years. What's it like as both a former player and coach to sort of see your former sport back to its regular being?
Well, it's a wonderful feeling. It seems like yesterday in some regards, and in other ways, it feels like a lifetime ago that I was down in Kingston. And I loved my experience there. I loved the university. It gave me an opportunity to compete in basketball at a very high level. And I carry with me almost every day those experiences, and I've grown from it. It's really helped me as I have maneuvered the ups and downs that life throws at you. And I loved Rhode Island URI, and I loved playing there. It was a wonderful experience.
It's I'm sure you enjoyed it. Besides the warm weather that is during the winter times, the great weather of that. Although as being a New England kid like yourself, you experienced those harsh winters as well. The last 3 years of this whole thing has given everyone, not just people like yourself or myself, but everyone the opportunity to sort of reflect on themselves and what they've learned that they didn't know prior. So over the last 3 years, what has Steve learned about himself that they didn't know prior?
Well, I've learned that time is precious and family is everything. As an athlete, I think all of us that participate in intercollegiate sports and on the high school level as well have that advantage in that we learn so much about ourselves that we carry with us and help us through those ups and downs. And in the last 3 years, I've learned that time really does fly. I'm a grandfather now, and yeah, thanks. I have 4 little ones, and I love going to. I think they're going to be athletes. I'm hoping, and I know that they've got wonderful times ahead of them. So it's been a great pleasure for me to watch that and to see them develop. And so for the last 3 years, it's been for me all about family and the way family dynamics and the way it changes.
Well, I'm sure for you also with that aspect. I mean, with your grandkids, hopefully being athletes, you of course have the skills to really help them achieve the high status, but you also probably want them to experience it on their own and let them navigate that through their own ways. I want to start sort of like this, early on. I mean, most athletes, I'm sure, maybe I'm incorrect, and you certainly can correct me, at some point realize that they have a skill level in any sort of field, not even athletics, any other field that sort of supersedes maybe those around them or friends they're playing with. So when you were growing up in Rockport, Mass, and you were playing basketball amongst other sports, baseball, I know you were a baseball player because they didn't have football in your town. When you're playing these sports and you're realizing that basketball, oh crap, I have something here that's better than the average player. How did you handle that as a young athlete before getting into high school? Then, of course, URI.
Well, I've always believed in the notion that kids need to find a passion. They need to find something that burns within them that's going to help them, and something that they really can enjoy. And I think it's important to let a kid be a kid. And for me, growing up in Rockport, some of your viewers or your listeners may have been up in that area in the North Shore of Massachusetts. It's beautiful. It reminds me of Kingston, Narragansett, Scarborough a little bit with the ocean. but it's not necessarily a hotbed for basketball. So I had to learn the game oftentimes by myself on a court. A lot of lonely times playing, but I found that that the passion that I had for the game, and it's hard to explain. It's hard. You can teach fundamentals to kids, I believe. Teach them how to hit a ball, to run, to shoot a basket. But I think a passion is very difficult to develop. And I think if a kid has that, they'll have an advantage. And for some reason, I had that growing up, and I just had a burning desire to succeed. And I think that helped me along the way.
When you getting into high school, and I believe it was your sophomore year, 1967, you had that historic one where state championship winning team, you know, teammates Frank Davis, Steve O'Connor, Steve Anderson on that squad as well. Compared to maybe the success of getting recruited, what was it like as a sophomore to win that state championship for that team that's often considered one of the greatest that school's ever had?
Well, first of all, you grow up idolizing the Boston Celtics. And for us to play a championship in the Garden was, I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, even all these years later, it was just setting foot in the gym. Reminded me of that Hoosiers film a little bit, walking in and looking around. It was just an amazing time in my life. And I played with Frank Davis, who you mentioned. Well, we had two Division I players on that team. For a very small high school, that was pretty unusual. So we had talent. We also played against a kid from a neighboring town that we beat in the finals from Manchester, who went on to play at Duke, full scholarship at Duke University, Rick Catherman. And so it was a remarkable time. The guys that I had, we just wanted to play. We just, it reminded me a little bit of the attitude that FAU has down here.
Yeah.
I'm down in Boca Raton, is maybe 20 minutes from where I'm staying right now. And just listening to the coach and to the players talk about, the joy and the thrill of just that connection with individuals, not caring who scored points or whatever. And I think we had a little bit of that attitude when I was in high school, and it was a wonderful thing.
After that year, junior year, senior year, you're starting to get schools to look at you and sort of, say, oh yeah, this kid may look good on my team. I know Davidson looked at you at UNC, and of course URI offers you the full ride scholarship. And I was listening to an interview you had done a few years ago where the head coach of URI, Thomas Carmody, did not see a single game that you played before offering you the full ride. During that process, though, and you had, idols at that point, people you're looking up to, George Ramsden and George Jacobson, who sort of, kept you on the right side, and, I don't want to say idols, but people, you looked up to and helped you maneuver through life. Besides those two guys, how did you, and obviously the process nowadays is much different than it was back then. There's no social media, but how do you remember handling that time when you're growing up in a town, Rockport, small town, and you're getting all these offers and these schools are looking at you to be part of your team?
Well, after we had won that state championship in the Garden, I started thinking about, really focusing on basketball and hopefully moving on to the next level. And I may be, at the time, and probably since, the only Division I basketball player that received a scholarship without the head coach seeing me play. Tom Carmody was the head coach down at Duke under Vic Bubas at the time, when Chuck Daly, UB Brown was down there. And when Tom got the URI job, I mentioned the kid from Manchester, Rick Catherman. And when Tom had a scholarship available, and Mr. Catherman said, you really want to take a look at this Rowell kid. He might be able to help you. It was late in the process, and Carmody took a chance. I think he had talked to a lot of people. Recruiting wasn't as sophisticated, Nolan, back in those days. Now you're identified early and they're all over you. But back in those days, it was not quite as sophisticated, and I had scholarship offers. But when I came down to Kingston, and Tom brought me around, and I kind of got a little bit of a chill walking into Keeney Gymnasium, and then you walk up the ramp there, and you go up to the second level, and it felt like a mini Boston Garden to me.
Yeah.
So that, coupled with the fact that the area reminded me of my hometown, as I mentioned before, and the fact that it was a full scholarship. And the sophomore year, he said, now look, we have a trip. We're going to the University of West Virginia. We're going out to LA to play Pepperdine. And then we're going to get on a plane. We're going to the University of Hawaii.
Yeah.
I said, where do I sign?
That's not too bad.
So that was pretty good.
Yeah.
And, and that coupled with also, I want to mention the fact that, historically, Rhode Island basketball has been prominent, especially in the early days. I'm going back to Frank Keeney.
Yeah.
And when they beat Kentucky by 1 in the NIT back in Ernie Cavalier's day, back in 1946, I think it was. So they had a tradition and a history of excellence at URI. And so I was happy to get the scholarship, and
the rest is history, as they say. Yeah,
that's history.
Well, I'm sure besides the wonderful, as I said, winter weather down in Kingston, it was an easy go for you to go to URI. I've asked other players who've come after you in the 80s or 90s or even later than that, sort of the discussion, and you probably have had that with kids who, when you were coaching back in Rockport as the high school coach, of what they could provide to the team, but also what you were expecting them to bring to the table. Do you remember any sort of conversation you had with Carmody about what you would help bring to the team or what they were expecting from you?
Well, again, I was a little bit of not a complete unknown, but I don't think he was quite sure. You got to remember now, back then, you had to play on a freshman team.
Yeah.
There was no, the rule changed, I think, in maybe my junior year in 70. There's actually 3 main rules. One was that. The other was there's no 3-point line back in those days. The 3-point shot in intercollegiate athletics basketball came, I think, around 1986. And then they also had the no dunk rule, which they said was the Lou Alcindor or the Kareem Abdul-Jabbar rule that he thought they might do. So those 3 rules were a factor. So I'm not sure that he knew exactly what I could do. But during my freshman year with Earl Shannon was the coach, who happened to be a teammate of Ernie Cavalier's back in those days. I averaged 20 a game. I think he knew that I would be able to be a scorer, and I wanted to be. I always prided myself on being not just a shooter, but a scorer. I felt like I could contribute to the team in many, with hustle points and
Sure.
with playing defense and contributing rebound wise and so forth. So I tried to have a well-rounded game as possible, and I think he knew after my freshman year that I would be able to help him.
Well, I want to ask you about that. And your freshman year, playing the JV team or whatever the situation is, and I know that UNC is one of the last few schools that have that JV team for the university. And nowadays, especially at our alma mater URI, it's a really sore spot where they're losing a lot of guys to the transfer portal. Whereas the guys back then, there's no real transfer portal per se, and you're
Right.
playing this JV team, going from high school, state championship player, success there. How do you remember handling that aspect where you have no other option? You have to play on this, JV team, freshman team.
Yeah, I wasn't thrilled with it. I would have liked to step, and I felt like I had the ability after I was there for a while, and I played. I just knew that I could contribute back then. And URI was pretty good. They had 2 guys, John Foltz, who was a draft choice of the Los Angeles Lakers, was on that team along with Claude English. Claude eventually became the head coach in the early 80s at URI and played with the Portland Trailblazers. And, we spent a lot of time talking, and of course in the gym practices, we used to practice with the team. So I think it was pretty hard to take, not being able to sit there and get out on and help the team. But I wished I thought it was a bad rule.
Sure.
I just wish that it was changed.
Well, you mentioned John Foltz, the late great John Foltz, and you played with underneath guys like him and Bill Metcalf, who I believe are possibly one of the only 2 true forwards on that team. What was it like learning from those 2 upperclassmen as a young freshman on the court?
We used to play. We had some great workouts, and we just beat on each other, and they were competitive. Claude and John, you mentioned Billy Metcalf. He was very good as well, and they didn't take a second off. Whether it was the off season or in season for practices, we just went at each other hard, and I really think that they helped me a great deal. As their career started to wind down, and John ended up being an iconic player over in Italy, as you know. Could have played with the Lakers. They felt like he was going to, and he was definitely going to contribute. Um, Having guys like that around were just tremendous. And then around my time, those great Providence teams with DiGregorio Bonds and Stakem, and so we used to play a lot, and pick up games and stuff. So that kind of competition locally really helped me.
Well, I mentioned the late great John Fultz, who passed away earlier this year, I think in Italy. What do you remember about him off the court that sticks with you to this day?
John was he was a character. He actually Lincoln Sudbury High School from Massachusetts, not too far from where I grew up. He was a character. He was a free spirit. He was happy-go-lucky. I'm not sure how much attention he paid to the classroom. I don't know, but he was a guy that was just awesome to be around. He talked basketball. He loved it, and we had lots of great times together. And with Claude as well. Claude was a competitor. He didn't let up for 1 second. I'm playing one-on-one with him in the gym one time. He said, "You know what? Let's play. I'm going to play you for your sneakers. You win, you get my sneakers." Well, both size 12. I said, "Okay, that works for me." I think he was fooling around. So we battled back and forth, and he ends up winning the game. He said, "Now give me your sneakers." I said, "These are brand new Converse sneakers, Claude. I can't get these to you." He said, "Oh yeah, those are mine." So, he was right on it. He was competitive.
Yeah. Well, it's probably a special thing for him, especially where Claude, I should say, to play for the school. And then fast forward a few years later, he's now coaching the program before he moved down south. After your time at URI, they would flutter around with different divisions before going to the present A10, I think in the mid 80s. For you, for your team back then, you guys were playing a lot of other independent teams besides the Yankee Conference, which you guys were a part of.
Right.
And later on in your time at URI, you guys would play other teams from other conferences. What was it like going up against just your conference and other independent teams?
We played a couple of SEC teams. We played Mississippi State. I can remember a regional game. We played, I think, Georgia Tech. We played Jacksonville. And having that opportunity, one of the reasons I came to URI was to be able to compete against other power conferences. And we played Jacksonville at Madison Square Garden, played those great St. John's teams down in the Garden. We got great exposure, and I mentioned University of West Virginia. We played out there, and it just makes you better.
Yeah.
You have to be prepared for it, and you have got to be able to compete. And I felt that was the case for us. We had mixed success. Same thing with Providence. Now Providence, we beat my junior year at Kingston, and I think the roof blew off. We beat them by 2. They were ranked 13th in the country.
Yeah.
And so, it was great competing. It wasn't just the Yankee. The Yankee Conference was New England major universities, but you got to remember, at UMass was a guy named Julius Erving.
Yeah,
he was pretty good, not too bad. He left after his junior year to go to Virginia. They also had a couple of other guys. You may remember. One was Al Skinner, and the other was Rick Pitino was on that team. So
not too bad to compete against that team, especially Ernie D. Your freshman year, although you're not playing, you guys take 2 wins, 1 away, 1 home game win against PC, which then you mentioned we beat them at home. Although years later the rivalry would get really hot, especially in the 90s and in late 80s with that team. To play an in-state team that was so good just as well, what was that like to then beat them twice, both home and away?
Well, it was a great experience. And I mentioned Keene at the very beginning. Keene Gymnasium was a tremendous home court advantage. I mean, I played in some games there. It was just packed, just off the charts. I think one of the great venues in New England at the time. My senior year, they opened the Providence Civic Center. So unfortunately, back in those days, we played a home and home with Providence.
Oh, right.
And then they opened the Civic Center, which I guess now is a Dunkin' Donuts Center. And so we had to play both Providence games there.
Oh, right.
But Keene was just, it was just, give me chills just thinking about it. It was, they love, they're passionate about basketball. course, you have to win.
Sure, yeah. Well, and now it's not you say, oh, now it's called the Dunkin' Donuts. Well, now it's changed again to the Amica Mutual Pavilion Center as well. So
I wasn't aware of that. So
they changed it last year. So it's been through a lot, especially with coaching changes recently.
yeah, that's right. And they just had another coaching change.
Yeah, so it's interesting, and you rise in a whole nother spot. Sophomore year comes around, you're now playing, and now you're getting some serious action compared to your freshman year where you were playing on the freshman JV team. How much of a rewarding and easy feeling was that for you to finally be able to have this potential being put in place and actually contribute?
It was great, and I think I averaged around 16 a game, maybe as a sophomore. We had Nate Adger, who was a pretty good player, came from Hartford Public, and Phil Hickson, who was from Newark, New Jersey, who was a really steady guard. He was very, very good, took care of the ball. And, I felt like I just felt like the transition was smooth. It wasn't, difficult in terms of, a lot of angst, a lot of worry and concern. I just knew going in, I was confident. I knew I was going to play, and I knew I could contribute and help. And all I cared about was winning. And I thought that we had some pieces in place to create that winning tradition.
Sure.
We had some issues that I can talk about later on that didn't help, but no, it was great. I loved coming in and experiencing coming on to Keeney and just feeling the crowd, the energy from the crowd. It was just unreal, just unreal.
That year, you mentioned Hawaii. You played a handful of really good unranked and ranked teams. PC, they had Ernie D and Miami's current head coach on the squad. Fordham, Duquesne, and Hawaii. Few of those who made the NCAA tournament appearances. Playing those teams, not just your conference opponents, but those teams on a weekly basis. What was that like now that you are a member of this team you're playing?
Well, it just gave me chills to think about, taking the floor and competing, because at that time we were all competitors. We wanted to win, and we went at each other hard. Duquesne, you mentioned Duquesne. We were down. We actually had a brawl down in Pittsburgh. A little bit of a scrum that developed got a little bit out of hand, but it was competition. And if you're a Division I basketball, that's all you can ask for. You want to compete, you want to play, and we had some really close, good games with those people.
That sophomore year, Fordham ends up winning the third place game, which is now not there anymore for the big dance in the NCAA tournament. What separated a team like URI that had talent, players like yourself and Nate Adger and so forth, but then besides the Fordham team, was there a big separation, or was it just more of just talent and skill level?
No, I don't think. I think it came down to execution. I think the talent level was fairly even, to be honest with you, Nolan. I think we had the ability to compete with pretty much anybody, especially in the East. And I think we had some problems finishing off games, and that hurt. But other than that, it was great.
That year, similar to the other years at URI, there's always, besides yourself, another player who's averaging in double figures or close to double figures. You mentioned Nate Adger, Phil Hickson, Dwight Tolliver, a few other guys during your time who were also averaging double figures that sophomore year. When you're not having to worry so much of having to take the mantle of the team and carry it yourself, and you have other guys who are having the same stat year as you, is that a helpful feeling and an ease for the tension for yourself?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was. I think we also had a backcourt. We had, I think, probably the smallest backcourt in the nation at the time, with Dwight Tolliver and Eddie Malloy. Call him the Flea. Eddie was 5'6".
Oh wow!
And Dwight was probably 5'9". So our backcourt was 5'6", but lightning quick. Those guys, experienced a little bit of difficulty with defensive matchups, but they were so quick, and we were pretty balanced actually. My sophomore year, we had guys that could score the ball and also play pretty good defense.
Looking through history online, at the best of my ability, the Yankee Conference regular season champions were dominated with UConn and Massachusetts for many years, until the Yankee Conference was transformed to the other conferences. Your junior year, the team does even better, and then you guys are Yankee Conference regular season champions.
Yeah.
How early on in that off season of your sophomore year did you see that next year we have a lot of serious potential to do some damage?
Well, I knew we had a lot of potential. Going into my junior year, we had Coach Carmody had brought in, I think, 5 transferred. We had Abu Bak from Duke came in, Tom Leone, who was 6'10" from Tennessee, Tom Barreo, who was a high school All-American in New Bedford, went out to the University of Wisconsin along with Lloyd Adams from Brooklyn. And then, so we had those guys, and we had Rob Young, who was a junior college All-American, I think out in Idaho or something. And so with those guys coming in, I thought, we have an opportunity to really be something special here. Yeah. And then we opened the season with a win against Manhattan in Madison Square Garden. We beat pretty good. I think expectations were really high, and we were open that we were going to be on a serious roll here. But again, when you have a blend of 5 new guys coming in from different programs, there's always going to be an adjustment. And I think we thought that, got off to a really good start. I think we were 4-0 to start the season my junior year, including that win in the Garden. And then it was a season of streaks, it seemed. Then we had adjustment problems, and we lost, I think 3 or 4 or 5 in a row. So it was tough for us, but I think we settled in for the most part, and we're happy to win that Yankee Conference championship.
That, your final 2 years, you're captain as well, a 2-time captain. How important now was it for you for the team success now that you were an upperclassman, but also a leader of the team?
Well, I think anybody that assumes that role hopes to be respected, and I think that I was, along with Abu, who I had tremendous respect for him. He was a really, really outstanding leader, and it's a good feeling, to be looked up to. And as a junior, I was a little bit surprised, but happy to take on that responsibility.
Ego, how did you handle as a junior being named captain? You probably weren't maybe expecting it, but then you're given the title and responsibility as a captain as a junior when most seniors get that. Was that something you handled easily, and did you think that people were reserved from you because you were a junior as a captain?
I had different types of leaders, as you well know, Nolan. There got the rah-rah guys screaming up and jump up and down. I always tried to lead by example, and I had hoped that my work ethic and the way that I approached the game, the practices, the responsibilities that I had, I hope that was respected. I think it was. And so that's the type of leader that I was. And I think that, many guys come in and, they just kind of standoffish and don't do a very good job. It's really a captain in name only, but I took it pretty seriously, and I wanted to be a good leader. And I hope that I was.
The following year, your senior year, you're a senior. Robbie Young, senior. Abu is a senior as well. After the junior year ended, how much did you think that was going to spill into your senior year? And when that wasn't the result, how do you remember handling it? And do you think you handled it differently as a captain?
Yeah, we had some disappointments in my junior year. I think we really thought that we could get to the postseason tournament and have an incredible year. And when it ended a little bit of a disappointment, I think we all were going into my senior year thinking, well, this is going to be it. We've had a year together now, and this is the time to jump, because basketball teams go through transitions during the season, off season, from one season to the next. People come and go, and but we essentially had the nucleus back my senior year. It didn't work out very well for us my senior year. I think there were some fracture among some of the guys, and it wasn't, in terms of wins and losses, wasn't really productive, but it was the way it was.
Once that senior season ended, how did you look back at your 4 years of URI compared to maybe 50 years later now that you look back at URI?
Well, I was kind of focused, because I really was looking forward to playing on the next level. I knew that I could my senior year. I think I averaged 23 or around there, give or take. And, I was really hoping that I could move on. So I didn't take a lot of time to reflect on my college career as I was transitioning into the next phase in my, hoping my basketball life. And so, but now it's different when you have time. All these years later, you have time to reflect and think back. I wish I had enjoyed the moment a little bit more rather than just focus on, what I'm going to do next. Now that I have had the time and the opportunity to sit back, I really loved, what my career was like at URI. I would have changed some things, but at that time I was looking forward to the next thing.
You're one of the probably select, I shouldn't say select few, because I'm sure there've been others before you, but on a list of probably a short list of guys who came to URI, had success, and then get drafted to the NBA. You get drafted 8th round to the New York Knicks, fresh off of the previous season of being NBA champions, not world champions, because technically they're not playing against teams across the world, but they're champions nonetheless. With a team with Willis Reed, Phil Jackson, Walt Frazier, getting drafted, I'm sure you're happy. But then how soon set in did you realize that you might not be getting playing time with this team?
Yeah, after the euphoria of the phone call and knowing that I was drafted by the defending NBA world champions, I thought, wow, this is unbelievable. But then reality set in. I thought, wait a second now, how much playing time is going to be there? And I looked at their front and their back court, and the back court with Frazier, Monroe, Bibby Meminger, and the guys that you mentioned, I didn't see minutes there. So I thought, okay, now what? Should I go down to New York and go through the motions? I didn't see roster space. So I made the decision to go overseas. I went to Orthez, France. Towards the end of my senior year, I knew that I needed surgery. I had a torn cartilage, partially torn, and I played. And I was hoping that it would hold up for me as I looked at, a professional contract somewhere. I didn't want to sit out, but it got to the point where I knew I needed the surgery. So I flew back to Providence. I had surgery. And then, back in those days, orthopedics have changed so much. Today, torn cartilage, whoop, you're in, you're out. It's outpatient. They get you back on the floor in a week or two. Back in those days, Dr. Savastano in East Providence, I mean, he just opened me up and took out cartilage and had a few other issues in there. So it was difficult for me to come back from that. And I think to make it in the NBA, and today with contracts and the way things are set up, and even back then when they went 10 rounds, they don't go 10 rounds anymore. But back then, when they go, you want to be one of the top picks.
Yeah.
But as an eighth round pick, it was difficult for me. So anyway, after I had the surgery, I did come back in an attempt to play. I played an all-star game in the Civic Center, and Bob Ferry, the Washington Bullets, had seen me play and offered me to come down as a free agent, which I did. But wrong place at the wrong time. They had some pretty good play. Wes Unseld and Elvin Hayes were on that team. Phil Chenier in the backcourt, Kevin Porter. And Nick Weatherspoon was the number 1 pick, and they had 2 other, Louis Nelson and Tom Kozelko. He was out of Toledo. Nelson was out of Washington. And they had signed 3 rookies. So wrong place at the wrong time there. And then it just, it just became difficult. It becomes a battle. So.
After your playing career ended, you spent some time before returning back to your alma mater of Rockport, Rockport High School, where you then would, of course, become athletic director and dean of students, and then become longtime coach, where you'd find success as a coach, as I just said. Returning back to your hometown to then start finding success as a coach, how much of a feeling was that in terms of redeeming, but also rewarding, in the sense that now you could find success as a coach?
Yeah, well, all along, Nolan, I really had the notion that I was going to work with kids. I love kids. I love working with them. I wanted to help kids and coach. It was something that I had in the back of my mind that I always wanted to do. I decided when I had gotten married, Linda actually played at UI. She's a pretty good player herself. She's in the Hall of Fame as well, by the way. She was a pretty good player. While she was finishing her undergraduate, I got my graduate degree in education. And with that, I thought, well, maybe I'll try coaching in the college level. I got a job as assistant coach at Bentley College in Waltham, Mass. And I just thought, well, it's really not for me. I wanted to be on the high school secondary
Sure.
level. And so I decided that I would take a job as a director of health visit and athletics and coach at my alma mater, and loved every minute of it. It was
Sure.
great. We had great kids up there, and it was an opportunity for me to return home and be with my family and
Sure.
raise my kids there, which is what happened.
Yeah. Now, as I mentioned before we got going here, family who were longtime coaches before retiring from coaching, so I know of I know of what it may seem like, as a coach wanting to get back into the action, get back to your old days of maybe playing, but you're a coach, so you're in the game, but not in the game as a player
Right.
is. How early on did you find yourself wanting to be in the game, but realizing that now I sort of just have to let them do it and do my
Yeah,
best on the sideline?
that's a great question. I mean, it's a transition that I think everybody who plays at a high level goes through. When your playing days end, well, what's a good substitute? A lot of people go into the officiating aspect of things, coaching, teaching, and I thought that the fit for me in Rockport was perfect because I knew the community, the school, and it was as close to playing as I could get, as to being on the court every day. I have a pretty successful basketball camp up there that I've run for the last 35 years. And that's been wonderful for me to stay involved in the game that I love.
Now, when most people retire from coaching or teaching, I guess, but mainly coaching, they have a building or a place named after them. But for you, you were still coaching when your gymnasium you played as a high schooler was named after you. After all the hours and thousands of shots you put up, to then have that be put on you as the gym's being named after you, how much of a humbling experience was that for you?
I at the time I just couldn't put it into words, Nolan. I think all of us in life every now and then have a chance to sit back and reflect, and that gave me the opportunity to think, boy, all of I never even dreamed in my wildest dreams of a name a gym after me. And it gave me the opportunity to think and really be thankful. And I had the feeling that I was really blessed to be surrounded by great people and have the opportunity to play this great game at a great university, and give me the opportunity to travel the country and actually travel the world
Yeah.
through the game of basketball. And so to have all of those experiences, um, it was kind of the culmination when that happened. And that ceremony was something that I'll always treasure.
No, it's been a few years since you were inducted into the URI Hall of Fame the URI Athletic Hall of Fame class of 88, and then 10 years ago this year you were inducted to New England Basketball Hall of Fame. On top of, we just talked about, the court being named after you that you played as a high school athlete. When you're recognized for your skills years after you played, is that another moment of pure shock, or is it a moment where you sort of thought this could be an option, but who knows what happens?
Well, I don't think anybody thinks they're going to be inducted into the New England Basketball Hall of Fame. And when that did happen and that call came in, I was just I was thought that's pretty amazing to happen, and it's because of the people that were surrounded. It gives you the chance to reflect on the coaches that you've had, your family, your teammates, and those kind of honors are they are individual, but they're really not.
Yeah.
They're really uh, as a result of the people and the work that they have put into
Yeah.
helping make you successful. And if it wasn't for my teammates, for my coaches, for my family, and teachers, it never would have happened. So that was wonderful.
Now, if my math serves me correct, career total points at URI is 1890, which at the time of graduation, I believe it was third all time at URI. Now I think it's maybe fourth or fifth. For you to have a record like that, that's still there, still part of the history at URI, are you more humbled at the Hall of Fame inductions and the court named after you, or do you have a little bit more love for the fact that the 1890 points is still something that still stands?
Well, it seems amazing that that has happened. I guess that's a tough question because I'm humbled by all of it. I really am. As I look back, and I'm just so humbled and thankful. And it's something that you just don't expect. And there's been so many great players out of
Yeah.
University of Rhode Island, and there will continue to be a lot more. I think there's going to be a lot of good things that happen. I think Coach Miller is going to do a
Yeah.
great job there, and I think that he's going to bring in his guys. And I think this year was a tough year, but
Yeah.
but they're going to make a lot of noise, and you're going to find that a lot of that pride that people have, it's there. It's in the university. It's
Sure.
there. It's going to come. You go to a game at the Ryan Center. They still pack it.
Sure. Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I mean, I'm sure the facilities, of course, the Ryan Center, although Keeney's one heck of a place, the Ryan Center is
Oh,
physically and architecturally speaking is way better than Keeney, and the
oh.
buses and flights and all that stuff, training facilities and dieting and all that stuff has improved since your days at URI. So that's one thing, and they're going through a transition period. They had 4 years with David Cox, and now Archie Miller starting a new era. And you had the team since you were part of had some struggles, as you mentioned, and you're right. This past year has had one of few struggles they've had the last few years. As a former coach and former player of URI who helped bring URI up to a high standard, what do you hope this new era with URI Archie Miller brings to it as a former player?
Well, we all watch closely, and I
Yeah.
know Coach Miller knows that. We all of the alums and the guys that played, we follow closely, and I just have enormous respect for the process that he goes through, and it's not easy in this dog eat dog world. And
Yeah.
now you've got the NIL to contend with,
Sure.
which I think is a huge factor in college, but we never had any of that.
Yeah.
And it will be interesting to see how that all plays out.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, you still have to have the players. You got to
Sure.
have guys that can play. He's a great coach and a great teacher. And once he gets his guys that
Yeah.
are going to come in and play his style of basketball, I think that you're going to find that the program's going to take off.
Sure. Well, I look at it just as a fan. Granted, I've lived in South County, Wakefield, for all my life, so I traveled a far distance, as I like to say, to go to URI, 15 minutes down the road. But David Hurley, Dan Hurley was the coach before David Cox, and he was the highest paid state employee, and he goes to UConn because URI can't offer him economically as much as he can get at UConn. And you see that with URI, you get a lot of players besides those like yourself who are really gifted, who are nowadays they're not getting a whole lot of 3-star, 4-star, 5-star group players. So you have to work with what you get, but also a lot of players I think nowadays are expecting greatness automatically.
Yeah.
And they're saying, oh, I want to play the whole game this year and I want to start and do all this success, win all these games. I'm not getting that. So now they take their ball and sort of go home perhaps and want to go to another program. But the thing is, the guys that URI get, they can't transfer and automatically do this stuff. And as you said, NIL is a big problem. So I think a lot of athletes perhaps are chasing that more than the opportunity.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I don't think I'd want to coach on this
Yeah.
level, given all of that you just talked about. It's so difficult. And, with the way guys are moving around and the way, it's a lot of it is about money, of course.
Yeah.
The schools moving from one conference to the next. But I think the A10, it seems to be pretty stable,
Yeah.
pretty solid now. And I think that you're going to see a lot more parity.
Yeah.
In recent years, I think there's been a pretty definitive line between the haves and the have-nots in that
Yeah.
conference. And I think that that's going to change.
Well, and you hope that you get guys who can commit, because it's one thing to say, oh yeah, I'm going to play for 4 years and then actually do it and not worry about your own game. And you guys had a lot where guys come for a year or two, then they leave, and there's no longer the days of this people like yourself or the Tommy Garrick, Silk Owens, other players who were there for all 4 years, and they're known in the rafters as one of the greats of all time. I want to ask you this, speaking of retrospect and all this stuff, to you as a former player but also member of the university, what does it mean to be a URI Ram?
Trying to put in put that into words is difficult. I will always be a Ram at heart. I know deep down what the university did for me. They stuck by me. They supported me. They were there every step of the way. They gave me the opportunity to do all that I could to bring out my full potential in life. And you soon realize once you step away from the university that it's not all about basketball. The lessons that you learn, you can't learn anywhere else virtually in life from competitive sports. It helps you through the ups and downs, the inevitable stuff that we all go through, the highs and the lows in life. And Rhode Island gave that to me, and I want to continue to give back. I worked with admissions program a bit in the alumni admissions program, and I'll continue to give to URI for as long as I'm alive.
Yeah,
because I know and I fully appreciate all that they have given to me.
Sure. Now, before we end today, and again, I want to say thanks to you, Steve, for joining us. I want to end on a little game called the One Word Challenge. So what it entails with this is that I'll throw out a few names of people, places, or things that have some connection to my guest, and you have to do your best to say a word or two or sentence that best comes to mind when you hear the word. So are you ready?
A word or just a word? Okay.
A word or two or sentence, whatever best comes to mind.
Okay, go ahead.
First one, Rockport, Mass.
My hometown that I love, and it was where my family grew up.
Kingston, RI.
My second home.
Steve Rowell Gymnasium.
A memorable place where kids can develop.
Keeney Gym.
My heartthrob. I'll always remember it.
Success.
Through hard work.
Hard work.
That also translates into success, and it's a work ethic that you build upon.
And certainly last but never least, in this cosmic universe we all called Earth that we live in right now and forever, Steve Rowell.
Someone who I hope is respected.
Well, I certainly think if people such as myself are reaching out and we're doing this today, certainly you fit the mold and probably will for the rest of your life. Well, Steve, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to do this. This is a true treat for me as somebody who grew up in this area and went to the university. It was
Nolan, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. It's been wonderful.
All those out there who enjoy this, because who the heck wouldn't? And down the line, and normally I say when my guest gets into some sort of Hall of Fame, although he's already in 2 Hall of Fames, you would say, oh my gosh, I still subscribe. So subscribe, comment, share all that fun jazz that they usually say with things of that nature. Follow on Twitter, Nolan Carr Night, and Instagram, the Nolan Carr Night Show, and in the words of Johnny Carson, the Dean of Talk Shows, such as this one. I bid you all a heartfelt good night. Till next time we talk again.